Good afternoon, and welcome to Behind Closed Doors, exciting enough, I'm sure, of a multi-platform pitch. So we're going to rock and roll so that we can have plenty of time to answer questions. My distinguished panelists today, Scott Ehrlich from Agility Studios. If you have seen LXD, raise your hands.
Yes.
That is cool.
Awesome.
Steve Amato from Omelet. Can we say what you're working on?
What's that?
What people should watch that's coming up?
We have a scripted comedy on the back of cereal boxes for Post cereal called Honey and Joy. So go buy a Honey Bunches of Oats.
How can you never get anyone in Hollywood to talk about what they're doing?
I know.
I was talking about a certain show from a certain producer who we all know and love. You can't talk about that? No. Okay, then. All right. We'll let that one be lost for a moment.
We could talk about, we launched a Harley-Davidson feature film that's coming out on Mundos for the Hispanic market.
You just run right by that.
So,
Just run right by that.
Just shuffling past.
That was a big clue I just delivered you. So in the multi-platform world, you got to pick up your clues. David Gale from MTV. What should we look at right now?
Right now, go to $5cover.com. and check out this multi-platform series that we did.
$5cover.com. Check out multi-platform series. You're only as good as the homework you do, folks. And Seth Shapiro, who I have the honor of laughing with just about almost every day of my life. Anything you want to point to?
No. I will cede my time to the gentleman from Philadelphia.
Philadelphia. Okay, great. So let's start, Seth. Tell me what multi-platform storytelling is. Let's get a context here. Okay, thank you. David.
Good.
Go ahead, Seth.
I think a lot of times these things make a lot more sense in retrospect than they do initially. I mean, like nobody ever said, wow, shit, we're in the Roman Empire and it just ended today. But, forms of media have been changing for a long time and sort of subtly. I mean, I think that what happens is, you can sort of trace the clues in which the essential parts of a story start to live other places than a linear one-way narrative. And so you can find all sorts of different ways, and I can look at all these guys and think about their projects. So like, for example, I remember being with Tony DeSanti when the VMA stuff happened with Twitter, and suddenly the VMAs, for example, became a show with Twitter that went beyond the broadcast experience. And in some ways, the tweet feed, for example, on, I know this isn't exactly answering your question, but I'm going to do it my way.
There is no exact answer to the question in our world right now.
So, for example, if you watched the VMAs 3 hours in the Pacific time zone, then you were seeing tweets, and all of a sudden, the graphic representation of Kanye West grew and grew and grew for the number of tweets he was getting, and nobody on the West Coast knew why, so everybody sort of started to tune into the show and try to figure out what was, and of course it was the infamous conflict between Kanye and Taylor Swift. I don't think you can fit that. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. That show becomes a completely different multi-platform experience that is organic and comes to life, and I think the horse doesn't go back in this.
Great. Curt Marvis, how do you describe... How do you define multi-platform?
Yeah, I sit behind the sign.
Curt, how do you define multi-platform storytelling?
Go.
Oh, let's see. How do I define it? You tell it lots of different ways. How's that?
Okay, that'll work.
I think that when we started this business with interactive storytelling, there was a big push to think that there was a different style and sort of different form that was necessary in interactive storytelling, perhaps, than was done in traditional. Not just talking about how the audience engaged, but just in every way. And I'm becoming more and more convinced that it's really just about a format change in terms of the length of time that a segment lasts. And that, as an example, I'm working on some scripted programs right now that just happen to be 6 or 7 minutes in length per episode. There's nothing materially different about them than it would be if we were doing a regular half-hour television series. And so I think that what's really changed for me in the last year or two, because I certainly didn't believe this back in the first sort of digital explosion in 99, 2000, when there were so many companies sprouting up about short film.
Yeah, most of these people in this room weren't born then, but
yeah, exactly. Before most of you were born. But I think that what's changed for me is that, and it's mainly been a lot of it's been just through watching my own teenage kids and how they watch content on iPhones and on pads, et cetera, that it's just a different, hi David, it's just a different format that they're consuming it on. It doesn't necessarily mean the form of the content has to be completely different.
So basically, if I can summarize for a second, you're talking about that great storytelling is still great storytelling no matter where you put it.
Absolutely.
Okay, David, I'm coming into your office and I say to you, the first words out of my mouth are, not I have a great story, I have a multi-platform idea. Is that how I should start my pitch to you? Or what does that mean to you if I say that?
Good question.
You know, that happened to me this morning, actually. And the first thing that happens to me is I get skeptical, because I really doubt very highly that most people really do know what that means. And in fact, none of us on this panel completely know what that means. What we do know is that, you know, at every moment that you look around, you see sort of new technology and new ways where people are engaging. And what's happening is that people are really taking to things like Facebook and Twitter in ways that sort of make it almost like picking up the telephone. So certain things are becoming almost sort of common sense, that you would clearly have certain aspects of your show that would be connecting to the audience, things like Twitter and Facebook now for sure. But also, you know, we use this project, we did this thing with a project called a horror film, and we used this company called Eventful, which has a demanded feature, and you could demand to see, you know, we said, do you want to see this show on TV? Because it was a digital project, and if 100,000 people said they wanted to see it, then we would put it on television, and 150,000 people said they wanted to see it. So we took what was an 8-episode series and we put it on television as a feature-length film.
So I'm just going to pull points out. So the first point was first point from Seth was it can live on any platform. People are interactive. It's somewhat organic and gives itself organic.
The pieces on the different platforms add up to something greater than.
The parts are greater than the whole, right, or make the whole. Curt said good storytelling is good storytelling, I'm paraphrasing. And now David is talking about a collaboration with the audience. He's actually talking about the audience as collaborators to a certain extent in the storytelling process. You are asking for response and getting it.
But I guess what I was going to say is like that sort of evolved over the course of making this project. And every project we're working on has a different set of things that sort of make it multi-platform or not. Sometimes it's an engagement with the audience. Sometimes it's the fact that something actually can be seen in different ways on different platforms and experienced differently. But you know, each thing sort of should feel naturally sort of like right for those different.
So you know how when they tell you in writing school to write what you know, do you think, Steve, I address this to you, do you think it's advantageous if you're writing from what you know to go from your own multi-platform lifestyle experience and maybe give your characters a multi-platform lifestyle?
I think you need to know how to write. You need to know how to write stories that matter, characters that have empathy. You have to write with conflict. You have to be a good writer. As far as multi-platform, in my opinion, you know, I look at stats on the wall as a creator, as an owner of a creation company too. It's like I look at these stats on the wall. 88% of mobile internet users are using their devices while watching television. So if I want to write a television show and I know that 88% of people watching that have a mobile internet device are using it, why the hell wouldn't I write story elements that go onto the mobile device? If I learned that 75% of consumers agree being able to access content across multiple screens improves relevancy and overall opinion to whatever they're watching, that's a 75% number.
Okay, that's kind of, you know, because you're citing stats. And
my point is that as a writer, I'm starting with the audience first.
Right.
It's not about what I know. Let's take for granted that everything I write is going to be through the filter of what I know. But the way we approach it is, what the hell is the audience doing? Let's create
right. But David's point is, and I think they're on the same page. It's not one size fits all. And you really have to know the platform that the audience is living on, and you really have to know how they behave. Now, my question is, you know, and I'll go to Scott for a second, is, okay, so I have a great idea. It's a great story. I'll give you that, Steve. Already you have a great story. I have a great story. So if I'm pitching to ABC, I'm just going network for a while. They're going to take a different multi-platform pitch than, say, Agility Studios or Paramount or NBC, because NBC is really well-versed in multi-platform. Yeah. Bravo is amazing in multi-platform.
USA Network.
USA. So just like you would do your homework before you'd pitch to Spike, should you do your multi-platform homework as well?
No, you should make something people actually want to see. No, honestly, like I kind of get stuck in this discussion a lot, and our series, depending on where you were in the world, you saw it on the internet first, or you saw it on television first, or you saw it on a disc first, or in certain parts of the world, you saw it in a theater first. We didn't sit down and say, okay, well, how's this going to play in a theater, and how's this going to play on an iPhone, and we just said, we know.
We're talking about LXD.
For LXD, we just said, listen, we know that there's a big dance community who cares about dance. Let's make a great dance story.
Okay, but I just want to point something out because I have complete respect for LXD. I love it. You know how I feel about John. But LXD actually grew out of the behaviors of the audience, because first you had the dance challenge with Britney Spears, and all of a sudden, and this is so much about organic. You basically saw an audience behaving in a certain way and gave them a story.
Yeah, but again, it started with you identify the audience, right? John proved out the audience when he was doing the AC/DC. It's actually Miley Cyrus, but
sorry,
people get her Britney confused all the time.
I get them confused. Yes.
So does Britney.
One's a porn star. Well, I'm sorry.
Live streaming.
That's actually a different project of mine, but we'll talk about that later. And once you saw there was an audience, it was a matter of finding out the story that they wanted to tell, and then from a product perspective, sitting back and saying, okay, listen, we're not going to worry about how long the episode is. The episode length is however long it needs to be to tell the story, given that we're targeting this at the internet, which means after 2 minutes, you got to justify your existence in 3-second increments. Number one. Number two, make it great. Don't worry about what screen somebody's going to watch it on. Just make it the greatest expression of that idea it can possibly be, with no money and everybody thinking you're crazy. Just focus on that. Now, we did have a big online community that's been the lifeblood of LXD since we started it, both from a fan standpoint and also from a talent standpoint. It's where we find a lot of dancers. But we didn't produce the show any differently, knowing it was going to be displayed across multiple platforms. We focused on just making it something people wanted to see. I mean, to Curt's point earlier, like, storytelling is storytelling. Like, to me, interactive storytelling is by definition an oxymoron. Storytelling is storytelling, and interactive experience is an interactive experience. They're just different things. We're storytellers, and so we focus on telling a story to the audience.
Okay, but let me go to the next place. So I'm going to go down, back to you, Curt. So you look historically at going on right now, and kind of Seth and I, in the interest of full disclosure, have been working on a really interesting project over the last 6 months, which I hope ends soon. But it's all about the future of storytelling.
Oh, look, there it is now.
We've discovered what a lot of the storytellers want. So, Curt, I'm coming to you and I say, you know what? I have a story to tell, but I know that my audience I have a mythology in this story. I have a really deep mythology. And I know that this audience, whether I have control over them or not, they are going to take control. The example is that in the first year of Heroes, fan content was running 3-to-1 against what the network was creating. At the end of the series, it was the opposite way around, with NBC creating a lot of content that the fans play in. You're Lionsgate Entertainment, and I say to you, look, Curt, I'm coming in and I'm pitching, and I'm saying, look, Curt, I'm not kidding you, I have the next Heroes. And whether it's for the Sci-Fi Channel or whether it's for ABC or whatnot, whether it's Flash Forward or V, I have something here, and I know these fans, and I know this is how they're going to play. So I also, in addition to the story that I want to create and tell, I also want to be able to integrate the audience from the fan base, and here's how I see I'm going to do it. What is your response to me? It's like, do you have a budget for this? Is it part of the production budget? Wait, we have to get the story right first? Because I'm going to say to you, I want my people in from the interactive side. I won't even call it interactive, I'll just call it multi-platform. I have ideas for how to integrate them in mobile. I want those people in the writer's room from the beginning. I'm not going to wait and bolt on afterwards. Because this is what we're hearing from a lot of the storytellers, but they're not getting it yet.
Yeah, I mean, my answer would be call Scott Ehrlich. And then he'll call me.
Just to pay for it, though.
Yeah, exactly. No, my answer is that I'm looking at a couple of projects that fit exactly that profile that you laid out right now, literally. And a little bit in terms of what Scott is saying, one of the first questions that I would ask on any project that I would look at is, who's the audience for this? David and I actually are looking at a project that I probably didn't answer that question enough in the beginning because we're trying to figure out who the audience is. But in most cases, when I'm not being completely insane, one of the first questions would be, well, who is this for, and how are you going to reach those people that it's for? And that's one of the reasons that when I was attempting to get LXD before Scott got offered more money, being he's really only in it for the money. Don't believe anything he says.
No, it's the love of filmmaking.
When I tried to get the LXD, the thing that was beyond the fact that I thought it was a great story and that I thought John was super talented and that I knew that Scott would make it happen, et cetera, it was that I knew that there was a built-in audience that existed that they had the ability to reach economically and in a exciting and engaging and interactive fashion. So that when John Chu posted something about the LXD, it was going to get that audience fired up about the project. They were going to in turn get other people fired up, et cetera, et cetera. And so as an example, a couple of these projects that I'm looking at right now have built-in audiences where the filmmakers are already engaged in building an interactive component that doesn't have anything literally to do with what the film is about and the story is about, in terms of they're not interacting, and it's not about them building it per se, but it's about them knowingly engaged in the content that's being created. So from that standpoint, the interactive storytelling component is very important.
Well, okay, that's all well and good. So, David, I'm coming back to you, and I am not John Chu, and I am not Tim Kring, and I don't come with my own Twitter following. I'm not Ashton. I don't come with a bazillion followers. But I have a really good idea, but I, as the storyteller, I actually don't know what to pitch to you, David. So I say, okay, let's just say we're pitching Real World, for example. This is about a bunch of people who live in the house, and oh, by the way, they all have their own Twitter accounts, or how do I approach this with you? How do I know if I should pitch multi-platform or not?
Well, the division I run is actually by its nature a multi-platform division. That's our whole purpose. We have a TV department, or many TV departments, of course, whose job it is to do the traditional sort of development. So whether it's nonfiction or fiction or reality, all of the things that sort of like you would expect from MTV, the network. But when you come to my group, you presume that in fact it's got multi-platform opportunities to it. And that might mean that ultimately it becomes a TV show. And one of the advantages of working at a place like MTV is that something can become a TV show, which is ultimately what a lot of people want anyway, because they think, well...
So in your division, I'm the proof of concept with you.
Yeah.
If I hit the zeitgeist right, and the audience, like you say, gets to want it, and they uplift it to a certain status, then it jumps to TV.
And I think that's a key right now, which is like you when you said the zeitgeist, the term that I was going to use is authenticity. So the thing that I look for, and Curt's kind of suggesting, is that the audience is the key, and knowing that audience means that you feel authentic to them, and whatever that might mean. It doesn't mean you can't come up with a superhero story or do something like Scott did with the LXD, but there's still an authenticity to the attitudes, the look, the feel, the dialogue, everything about it. And it doesn't always have to be fiction. It doesn't have to be a story in the traditional way. It could be something that is much less about sort of the formats that we consider television formats. And although I agree in many ways with what Curt was saying, it's like we're just looking for stories and we want to engage people. There are other ways to engage people. I mean, we're working on other things. You could have a cooking show, for example. And then
you remember one question, 50 people? Benjamin,
right.
I can't remember Ben's last name, but that idea of asking one question to 50 people, where would you like to wake up the next day, that took off like crazy, and that made his career.
Right, and so one of the cool things about the medium we're in is that you don't have to follow the traditional rules of telling stories or even what the subject matter is, and you could have a phenomenon. So I encourage people to think out of the box and not just reprocess what they learned from, from television or from movies, and start thinking, well, we have an opportunity to be much more engaged with the audience, to have a connection. That doesn't mean that you're telling a story and then they're reacting to it, or they're just looking for extra content.
Just to add what you said, Dan Harmon, who's the creator of Community, an executive producer, and also has Channel 101, has said the thing that excites him most now about up-and-coming talent is they're in film school, they don't go to film school. Like learning how to tell stories on the internet, watching social media, they're at this new training ground that is actually giving rise to this out of the box, and he can't wait to work with those guys. Seth, you?
Yeah, getting to David's point about authenticity, I just want to give an example, if I can, of my favorite project in that regard. I have a friend who I worked with at Disney for a long time. He's a great game designer, has done over 50 games, was the founder of one of the founders of a very famous game developer. And so when the iPhone started, he thought, well, maybe I can do like a role-playing game like we used to do in the old days, but as an iPhone game. So they did, and it was quite successful, and people liked it. And so he thought, well, maybe we can take this somewhere else. And he thought, maybe this would be a good book. People really like the character. So it went from being, the notion was, okay, here's this character that's sort of subservient to this role-playing idea, which now has to fit within the platform of the iPhone. Got enough downloads, he said people like it. So they started pitching a book around it. And lo and behold, he got a 3-book deal from Simon & Schuster. The first book is already out. The second book, which I read recently, is fantastic. It's much bigger than the first. And what he started to do, and we talked about a lot, was he's actually started, and I think I told you about this, Brian, he's actually started to go out on Twitter and Facebook and create chronologically the backstories of the characters in those books. So if you buy the book in a year and a half, you will actually be able to go back and in time watch Foursquare check-ins and all these things around the actual characters in those books. Now, the reason that it's really interesting to me is because if the game hadn't worked in the first place, it never would have happened. It was the authenticity and the interest that people had, to your other point, David, in that property, and to what Scott was saying. It was the interest that people had in that product and in that universe in the first place that made it worthwhile taking it to a different platform. So now there are a lot of potential discussions around TV or film, and what will happen with that is that the world will expand to meet it, so to sort of fit the model that you like to talk about, the story-centric universe
Right,
model.
in a story-centric universe, but actually, Scott is in that story-centric universe because LXD is a world unto itself. And the idea is, and it has, the great thing, if you're a storyteller, and I think this is true for Real Housewives, there's a canon. There is a canon. And if you go, like the creators of Heroes would go back and check the Heroes wiki to maintain the authenticity of what they'd written the season before because they forgot, but the fans remember.
Yeah, but if I can,
we've had fans like within moments. We posted an episode where one of the characters receives a note that has 2 GPS coordinates on it. Less than 5 minutes after it had been posted, which is a little weird because it's a 15-minute episode, they were all posting that it was Pleasanton, Iowa. It didn't take them too much longer to figure out we'd built a website for Pleasanton Hospital, and people were booking appointments, which was weird. We had another episode where just in the background there's an infomercial playing, and it's classic. I get this call from my producer at like 2 o'clock in the morning. Hey, you set up a Google Voice number, right? Yeah. Well, what was the number? I give them the number, and I go back to sleep. And then a few days later, my phone just keeps ringing and ringing and ringing and ringing, and I completely forgot that number was tied to my home number, and he'd put it on the infomercial, and I was getting like 15 calls an hour.
Well,
off of this, which was crazy.
If we were going into if we did that panel to what you're talking about, it is that you create a world, they jump and they live, they want to participate in that world like nobody's business, but the responsibility for creating content in that world can't rest entirely with you, it has to rest with
them. No,
you.
it doesn't, but to sort of tag on, from a development standpoint, if somebody walks into my office and says, I have a multi-platform property to pitch you, my first thought is, great, you're going to be a lot of work.
And a lot of money.
And then the second thing I say is, don't pitch me that.
Pitch me this.
Tell me about the world you want to create. Tell me about the world you want to create. Tell me about what the characters in that world are. What is it they do? Why do they do it? And most importantly, why does anybody give a shit? And you start with the expression of the world. Then figure out what your first product needs to be, right? Now, maybe your first product, as it was with LXD, is a linear storytelling product. Okay, fine. You got a story to tell, you got to tell your story. That's different. That's a different line of business for LXD than our live performance business, right? So we're on tour opening for Glee right now. We just did a show in London. We're doing another one in Asia. That's a great business, but we don't maintain an integrity of character there. We have a tone and a look that's consistent between live and the series, but we don't worry about our characters.
You maintain the brand.
We maintain the brand as a dance brand in the live environment, whereas it's more of a storytelling brand in the entertainment world.
And that is a conscious decision. So what we would say is, at least in our end of the business, we would say this is an anchor platform. So your anchor platform was LXD first on the web, and then you chose other linear distribution platforms. Heroes platform, Lost, all those, everything Bravo does is anchored in television. So we say there's an anchor platform, and then what we call these other things like participation gateways, place for people to come in.
Yeah, but to me, if you look at to me, Hollywood right now is a lot about franchises, right? And it's a bit of a there's a really good word to describe it, but I don't know what it is. But at the one hand, the studios want to do things with as little risk as possible, right? Their job is invest the money they invest in films with as little risk as possible against the return that they're looking for, which means a lot of sequels, remakes, material from another media because they're safe, they're proven, they have brands. If you come to them with a proposition that can be a new franchise, which is how we view our business, which is creating franchises, working with creators to take a really good idea, really scalable idea, really talented creative team, and build that into a franchise by business managing how you architect the business. You can take it very, very far because that's what the studios crave. That's what the studio system craves, is things that can be repeatable franchises.
It's formats and licensing and merchandising.
And so, on the one hand, they crave these formats. On the other hand, nobody wants to do the risky work of developing them. I use the analogy of the CEOs of Colgate-Palmolive and Procter & Gamble both gave roughly the same speech within a week of each other a couple of years ago, and it was basically, look, we're not in the product development business, boys. We're in the marketing and distribution business. That's all we do. We're not going to waste any money creating the next great toothpaste. Tom's of Maine will create a great toothpaste. That's fine. We'll overpay to own it and then put it in our distribution system. Post-writer's strike, this town works more like that than it used to, where the studios were vested and investing a lot more money than they do now in trying to create that next franchise. So to me, as an entrepreneur, the opportunity space is do that hard, risky work of developing these franchises so that you can bring it up into an ecosystem that that's primed to receive it.
Steve, you were nodding your head, and
to keep from falling asleep, probably.
well, you're talking. We're talking about franchises, which, call it what you will, franchise or story world or brand. You're creating something that people can identify with, because everybody's talked about the importance of story. Mm-hmm. You're creating something that people are identifying with, but you just said to me today, I need a multi-platform producer. I need a multi-platform showrunner, which is a new profession, actually.
I mean,
I think it's still executive producing. You just hire the best mobile producer, but there's a new challenge. So he said, I hear multi-platform and I hear a lot of work. So now you're in it.
I mean, my life is staring down the barrel of 17 different deliverables on one entertainment. We consider ourselves showrunners for brands. We hire, a TV showrunner or a mobile executive producer, and we basically just have to put the entire big idea together and then make it live across every channel. And there's really not a lot of people that understand what the hell we're talking about. So we bring people in to do what they know, and then corral the standards and make sure that it's amazing.
Okay, I'm going to address this to Seth and you. How do you can go precariously off the rails. That is why the video game of Avatar was a complete failure, because the integrity of the Avatar world was not maintained. Who is responsible for maintaining the integrity of the world as it grows?
I mean, I think it's the creator. I mean, you have to be the person that has the vision for the story, the characters. When we tell our stories, the people that write the shows, if it's a sitcom, they're tweeting and they're doing the Facebook accounts. We don't bring in junior writers to write that stuff. It's like that's part of your job, is taking this character's universe and all the way to the finish line.
So we go back to I'm just trying to grab out what you can take from this. So what we're talking about right now, and every one of you has alluded to it and even stated it, which is strong characters, very good story development, knowing your world, knowing your own canons, and that's the starting point. That's the center of the story. Mm-hmm. So is it ever, Curt, that you see a property and you, Curt, see the multi-platform possibilities before the creators, and it's you pitching multi-platform back to the creators?
I mean, yeah, that happens sometimes, even with Trailer Trash, which was the first original show that we did. It's a 5-minute animated show that premiered on Hulu and is shortly going to launch on YouTube. And we just completed, as an example, for lack of a better description, an Angry Birds-esque game with the 4 hillbilly characters in it, where they, fly through the air and you propel them with flatulence and things, highbrow things like that. And
thanks for raising the storytelling bar.
You're welcome. Yeah, that was really important to us. And it was actually how low could we go on the bar and continue to have people watch it. But that concept was always designed when it came in, was always designed as a short-form animated show. And it could just exist as that, but we then designed it so that it could be bundled together and put out as a half-hour program. We started to make games around it. We have the opportunity, if we want at some point in time, if it's successful enough, to build a social world around it. So there's a lot of other things that came in around that project that were viewed by us as opportunities upon success, and it's too early to tell whether that's going to happen or not.
I go to the Disney model for a second. I don't know that this is still true, but there was a department at Disney that I once went for a job at long ago, which really was responsible for exploiting Disney properties to the max.
The brand police.
Yeah, they weren't just the brand police. They really just went out and got every license. And do you think that there needs to be in the future, I'm just going to need a futurecast for a minute, inside studios or inside networks, some chief integration officer, some person that really looks at...
At Disney, it was a franchise management group that still exists. It's smaller than it used to be, but they had people whose job it was to take a movie and figure out what the fully envisioned franchise looks like across the Disney universe, right? What's the video game? What's the online game? What's the ride? Right?
The bed sheets,
et cetera. Yeah, all that kind of stuff. The right licenses to go after.
The hats.
There's a company based in New York called Starlight Runner that does that for a living. People come to them and say, okay, we just made Pirates of the Caribbean or Marmaduke, whatever it is. Can you develop the franchise plan for this property? And honestly, that's sort of how I view our company is when a creator comes in, what I want to understand is do they have a great vision for a scalable world that they're capable of executing?
Scalable world.
And that there's an audience waiting to see. So for dance, it was easy. Go on YouTube and look at dance, right? And there's a lot of videos. We have a project in racing, lots and lots of racing videos, and on and on. So that work is kind of what we do then is with the creators sort of figure out where to take that story and where to tell that story.
I want to go to the audience for questions. So if you have a question, just come up here while we're talking. So, when Harry Potter was the first Harry Potter feature was launched, they got it together, all of Warner Brothers, from the WB to Warner Brothers Studios to the studio stores to Warner Brothers Online to AOL. It was just a cross-platform marketing success story, and it was all marketing. And it really doesn't seem to have happened since. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, where are we as a business right now? Because Fox does it one way, or not at all. ABC does it another way. NBC does it another way. every network, every film studio is approaching it differently. Some approach it as marketing. There are some breakout multi-platform properties that are starting to define the stuff. Are we in the very beginning stages of this, and are we all figuring it out? And
Yes.
okay, and there's no template for it. It doesn't sound like there's a template for it.
No, I think, to answer your earlier question, at Lionsgate, I mean, absolutely there's a different approach than there was even as recently as probably a couple of years ago when we're making what would be considered a non-tentpole title, because again, the studios, when they're making a Harry Potter or a Batman or a, the X-Men or whatever, that whole merchandising engine is kind of part of the machine that's creating that title from the get-go. But I think what is changing is that the various opportunities that exist, again, it goes all the way back to the Zucker, analog dollars to digital pennies. Well, he's right, but you can string together a lot of digital pennies to equal back to that analog dollar, and if you're lucky, those digital pennies might actually have better margin associated with them than that analog dollar did, and you might end up maybe with a little bit less revenue, but much more profitability on the project.
And a certain amount of sustainability.
And sustainability.
Because the world continues to expand. It's like a big bang, and then it just keeps.
And there are different ways to get products. So we're constantly looking at what you wouldn't consider a tentpole property in a traditional sense, and saying how can we milk everything out of this. And actually, I was just in a meeting on I think Tuesday of this week where we're starting to look at the supply chain effort, if you will, on any title that starts with theatrical, and how are we all going to make sure that we're maximizing that from the get-go. And we have Hunger Games right now, which we're hoping is our Twilight, and dealing for the first time with a title that has virtually unlimited places to go for monetization, but having to stay authentic to what that brand is all about.
Well, and it's not just that. I mean, 2 seconds. It's not just that. But what we've learned, I mean, Starlight Runner, they may do the marketing of the franchise, but what we get to do is the actual story and the prioritization of the platforms. Where are you going to go first? And there's so many considerations. What is that audience worth there? How are we going to monetize the data that's around us? We're going to get a lot of data from how the audience behaves, and that's going to have value. So not just monetizing, but the prioritization of which platform you go to, and do you follow the migration pattern of the audience, or do you go where the money is? There's just so many different choices of how to grow a story brand.
Yeah, but if you're launching a new franchise, you go where the audience is, because at the beginning, that's all that matters.
Yes, well, you've got to get their attention first with something that's authentic and that they can identify with. Again, great story. Yes, your name, what you do, and who you want to ask your questions.
Show. I'm a producer-writer. I have different types of shows in different genres, but one of my shows is a non-scripted, healthy lifestyle show. I know multimedia platforms generally lends itself to sci-fi and fantasy worlds. Have you seen a lot of multi-platform for like lifestyle shows that
absolutely.
you have
absolutely.
seen?
Especially lifestyle shows.
Yeah, the Scripps networks do a great job with this. Home and Garden, Food TV.
Look at all the HGTV stuff.
Yeah.
Tip stuff, huge.
Biggest Loser.
Right, that's true. I guess so.
They're for a show like that, which creates a lot of assets that the audience is going to want to interact with afterward, recipes, cooking direction, whatever. Those are great pieces to have in an interactive environment because they're evergreen. Like, what's good to eat? Well, maybe not. I guess things change. What's good to eat today is it still good to eat tomorrow? But mostly that's true.
Value add entertainment like that is very, very good for multi-platform.
And the other side is you're going to start to solicit content from your users as well, so that they get to share their experiences and you build the community. People, these days, the next step in shows like that is that people have to feel that they matter personally. And the tools that you give them, they can use and they can share their experiences. And that's why Tim Shea is sitting behind you, because he helps his audience to share those experiences. Another question? Oh, come on.
We've stumped them.
Yeah, I'll take it to get back to, since it's animation, I wanted to also talk about Disney really quickly because So for example, when I worked at Disney, I led a couple products around day-and-date movies like Tarzan or something. And one of the things that we did at the time that doesn't happen so much anymore is I would have to take the entire creative team and meet with the lead animator. So for example, before we did a Tarzan title, we actually looked through the artistic influences of the guy who created Tarzan. And by today's standards, that may seem a little bit excessive, but the impact is profound, because what winds up happening is the creative process of the original property seeps into the pores of the guys on it, and it becomes self-selecting. So not only did you in those days go back to feature animation and show them what you were working on, but the games and the rhythm of the stuff began to feel like an organic outgrowth of it. And you know, on the other hand, going back to the other way of doing it was, in the old days there was this sort of prohibition at Disney about crossing brands. So you couldn't have Tarzan, you couldn't actually have Belle and Sleeping Beauty in the same scene because they came from two different worlds. And the driver for that was the creation of this whole sort of princess brand thing, which you know, a lot of people, actually, believe it or not, at the time had doubts about. But that became a matter of taking all of those individual characters and figuring out, all right, well, Sleeping Beauty is this and Cinderella is this, but what are they all together? So once there was sort of a consensus and a style guide or a Bible about what the hell does this mean? You know, all right, so what are we going to say with these products? It became, you know, a multi-billion-dollar industry. If they hadn't decided to put those character sets together, this whole princess craze would have been severely hampered.
Her question, I think, is what is the difference between franchise and brand extension versus content experience?
Yeah, I think the reason it's unclear is the answer is it's both, right? So for the LXD series, episodic and long form, we release it both ways. So we release it as 10 episodes, and then we put them all together and we release it as effectively a movie. It's the same thing no matter where you see it, right? For other properties, like a television show, the thing that you do online might be something completely different, like a game or a parallel story. You know, for us, we have one project that involves a feature, a series of live performances, and character backstories on the internet, right? So those are three different products. They're going to go to three different places, but they're all part of the same project. I think it really sort of goes back to like what's right for your property, what's right for the thing you're building, what makes sense to the audience you're building it for.
Sure. You'd also mentioned this idea of an anchor platform. And if you're really looking at making what essentially is a movie or a TV show, and that's really at its core what it is, then you're going to find that anchor platform, and then you're going to create all kinds of multi-platform extensions around it. Whereas a lot of what we're seeing now is, from its inception, it's something that really has many components and iterations in various platforms, and it may depend on having those multiple touch points. But it doesn't live alone very well.
Right. It's fun. It's interesting because some multi-platform projects can have a multi-platform extension that can live separate from the show, but some are integrated multi-platform projects where the other platforms feed. You can still watch what's going on the anchor platform and not feel like you're lost, but you'll have a much richer experience if you play on the other platforms. And I think that both of you actually made the same point, which is whatever your story is, you want to bring people to your story first. I am a big proponent that the audience will tell you exactly where they're going to go and exactly what they want. The audience is leading, and you have to. That's why Heroes grew. My perception is that any multi-platform project grows organically because the audience begins to behave in a certain way, and you take your cues from what the audience is doing, and you give the people what they want. You mean that's exactly what happened with LXD. There was a question over here. You've got to speak up really loudly. This will be our last question, I think. Jordan? Two more questions. Go.
There is no spoon.
Okay. What I was going to say to sum up the panel was that you got to know your tools and you got to know your audience. So if you're dealing with boys 18 to 25, you got to know where they're living, how they're using technology, and then you decide if that's appropriate. When you say trends, tablets are a trend, but only 2% of the population has them. But is it worth doing the experiment on it if that 2% is the 2% that you're trying to reach?
I would watch case studies of things that are working and kind of find your own list, but I don't think there's a list out there because every story that we tell is completely different. We do create formats off of that story, but it's only specific to that one experience. So it's more
and it's once you have an idea of what you have.
Exactly. Then we could sell that.
I said it's also once you have an idea of what you have, then you can make better decisions about it.
Yeah, it's very. I think it's a very organic process. You know, there isn't it's like the early days of television. The early day, we're finding our way.
We're listening.
And, yes.
One more. Hi, I'm Dave Walsh, independent producer.
I know you.
And Mr. Hurst. We talked a lot about story, and in a couple of the sessions earlier today, there was a talk of when we bring our sizzle reels and we bring our pitches to the networks, should there be a multi-platform component to the pitch? And several of the shows I've pitched, I've put that in there. The thrust of the beliefs earlier today was we have people here, multi-platform gurus, that will create the multi-platform environment if, in fact, it's something that warrants it. So, as a creator, is it more important for us to understand that there's a multi-platform potential and to play that out in concept ourselves and then let the networks decide it, or should we hint at it, or should we flush it out?
Okay, gentlemen?
My opinion is that it's, at the end of the day, it's all about audience and money. And so if it's shown in the context of why there's an audience that exists and is hungry and thirsting for content in this particular area of whatever your show is about, and that audience not only shown a desire for that content, but that you're going to be feeding them what they're already looking for and you know how to do that. And if it also shows, therefore, that there's sustainability across whatever that content is all about because of that connection with an audience that's both sustainable and growable, I think that's getting that point across is going to be more important than exactly what the creative ideas of how you're going to do it.
I'd answer that slightly differently. I think it depends what you're trying to do. If you're trying to sell a show, then don't, because they want their interactive department to do that, and all they want to hear from you is what the TV show is. At the end of that, you'll have sold the TV show. That's great. If you're trying to build a franchise, then no, right? Then if you're trying to build a franchise, to me, the creative minds have to keep control of all of those products for a certain period of time. And one of the things that we did with LXD is we've endured a lot of pain from a budget standpoint, from a bootstrapping standpoint, so that we could preserve our ability to continue driving the creative and the product selection and all these other sort of things. Whereas if we were just trying to sell a show, the shortest path from here to selling the show is to be more pliable to what the network wants to do with it. So to me, the answer is different depending on what you're trying to achieve.
And I think the answer is different on where you're going. So, for example, if you're going to Bravo, forget it, because they will take your show and they will manufacture it. If you're going to Fox, they're in the baby stages. They don't do a lot of cross-platform programming. But what Scott the word he didn't utter was rights. And the question is, what rights can you hold on to? And it depends on who you are, and it depends where you're going. All of them. Yeah, good luck with that. I mean, even the great storytellers can't hold on to their rights with network television. You have a different situation. So, unfortunately, these guys will be available. Unfortunately, that's our time. Scott, Steve, David, Seth, and Curt, thank you so much. And thank you guys. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you. If you have questions for our panelists, they will meet you in the lobby.